The wool sweater scratched at my neck as I adjusted it in front of the bedroom mirror. At 67, I'd grown used to clothes like these, soft, worn, familiar, the kind of things you'd find in a thrift store bin, not a department store window. My reflection stared back at me. Sylvia Turner, retired librarian, with gray hair pulled into a neat bun and lines on my face that told stories I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. I looked ordinary, forgettable, even, and maybe that's how I'd wanted it for the past 12 years. Today, though, was different. Today, I was meeting my son, Edward, at the Aspen Room, a sleek, upscale restaurant in downtown Denver. He'd called 3 days ago, his voice clipped and professional, saying we needed to discuss important family matters. Those words had been looping in my mind ever since, each repetition tightening the knot in my stomach. In my experience, Edward's family discussions were rarely about connection. They were about correction, his way of pointing out, with that polished smile of his, all the ways I was falling short. I grabbed my purse, a faded leather thing I'd carried for nearly a decade, and checked its contents one last time. $32 in cash. A debit card linked to an account with barely enough to cover groceries. And a single business card tucked behind my driver's license. Grayson Wealth Management. I hadn't looked at it in years. Not since my husband, George, passed away. It was a relic from a life that felt like someone else's now. The drive to the Aspen Room took 20 minutes. My old Ford Focus rattling through the streets of Denver. Past glass-fronted boutiques and coffee shops I hadn't stepped foot in since George was alive. I used to walk those streets without a second thought. Back when money wasn't something I counted in quarters. Now, I prayed each morning that the car would start. Parked 2 blocks away to avoid the valet's knowing glance. And fed a handful of coins into a meter that charged less than the ones closer to the restaurant. Edward was already there when I arrived. Seated at a table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. His dark suit catching the light like it was tailored to remind everyone he'd made it. At 42, he had his father's sharp jawline and ambition. But none of George's quiet kindness. He was a director of marketing at a tech firm. The kind of man who spoke in buzzwords and always seemed to be calculating something. "Mom," he said, standing to give me a quick, careful hug that felt more like a formality than affection. "You made it. You look nice." The pause before nice was just long enough to catalog everything he didn't say. The sweater I'd thought was presentable enough. Bought on clearance at a second-hand shop. The sensible flats that screamed practicality over style. The absence of the jewelry I'd sold over the years to stretch my Social Security checks. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile as I sat across from him. "You look as sharp as ever." Edward's table was in the center of the dining room, where everyone could see him. He'd always cared about being noticed, by clients, by colleagues, by anyone who mattered in his world. He was already scanning the menu, his fingers tapping the table in that impatient rhythm I remembered from his teenage years. When he was building up to something I wouldn't like, "I ordered us the chef's special," he said, not looking up. "I figured it'd be easier. I know you've been keeping things simple lately." There it was, the first little jab, wrapped in a smile that could fool anyone who wasn't his mother. Keeping things simple, that's what he called my life now, my one-bedroom apartment. My discount groceries, my refusal to let him pay for things because I didn't want to feel like a burden. I'd spent 12 years living modestly, ever since George's death, because I wanted Edward and his sister, Claire, to build their own lives without leaning on their father's money. I thought it would teach them resilience, independence, the value of hard work. But sitting here, watching Edward's eyes flick over my sweater like it was an offense, I wondered if I'd taught him the wrong lesson entirely. "Thank you, Edward," I said, keeping my voice steady, a skill I'd honed over years of these conversations. "That's thoughtful of you." The waiter appeared, all polished deference, recommending wines that cost more than my monthly electric bill. Edward nodded along, asking questions about vintages with the ease of someone who belonged in this world. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling like an outsider in my own son's life. He'd built something impressive. I'd give him that, a career, a family, a house in the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were always perfect. But every step he took into that world seemed to pull him further from me. So, Edward began, once the waiter left, his voice taking on that careful tone he used when he was about to deliver bad news. I wanted to talk about our 10th anniversary party. It's coming up in a few weeks. And we're planning something special. My chest tightened. Anniversaries were big in Edward's house. His wife, Lauren, loved hosting lavish events, and Edward loved the chance to show off their success. That sounds wonderful, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. I've been looking forward to it. Well, that's the thing. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since I'd sat down. Lauren and I have been talking, and we think it might be best to keep this one smaller. More intimate. The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. I felt my hands tremble slightly and pressed them harder against my lap. Smaller, I repeated, my voice calm despite the cold spreading through me. Meaning, it's just, with Luna turning 16 soon and Ethan at 12. They've got their own friends they want to include. And Lauren's parents are coming from Chicago, which already makes it a full house. He paused, letting the implication settle. A full house. Everyone but me. Edward's words hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Smaller, he'd said, more intimate. I sat across from him in the Aspen room, the clink of wine glasses and murmurs of other diners fading into a dull hum. My hands were still pressed tightly in my lap, trying to stop the trembling that had started the moment he'd leaned forward. His voice smooth but sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. I see, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. So, you're saying adding one more person, me, would be too much? Edward's smile flickered, just for a second, like a crack in his perfectly polished facade. Mom, please, he said, his tone softening in that way he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's not about you personally. It's just, he paused, searching for the right words. Or maybe the ones that would hurt the least while still getting his point across. The truth is, things have been a bit awkward lately. Awkward? I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. I could feel my heart pounding, a rhythm that matched the tap of his fingers on the tablecloth. Well, yeah, he leaned back, crossing his arms, his eyes darting to the side as if he didn't want to meet mine. Lauren's parents, they're successful people. Mom, her dad just sold his consulting firm for millions. And her mom runs a foundation for the arts. They're used to a certain vibe. You know? Conversations about investments, travel, things like that. And lately, you've seemed, he hesitated, choosing his next words with the precision of a surgeon. You've seemed out of place. Out of place. The words hit me like a slap. Sharp and stinging. I thought of last Christmas, sitting at Edward's dining table while Lauren's mother, Cynthia, talked about their month-long safari in Kenya. I'd listened quietly, nodding along, aware that I hadn't taken a vacation in years, not since George died. I remembered slipping away to the kitchen, pretending to check on the dessert, just to escape the casual mention of costs that would have covered my rent for a year. It was only $20,000 per person, Cynthia had said, waving her hand. Really quite reasonable. I was listening, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I was interested in their stories. I know you were, Mom. Edward's tone was patient, the kind you'd use with a child who didn't understand something obvious. But that's the problem. You're just listening, not contributing. It makes people uncomfortable when someone can't keep up with the conversation. It changes the whole dynamic. The first course arrived then. Some delicate arrangement of seared scallops and edible flowers that looked more like art than food. I stared at it, my fork untouched, while Edward continued, his voice calm but relentless, dismantling my place in his world with every word. Look, we want everyone to feel comfortable, including you. I think you'd be happier having a quiet evening at home. Maybe watch a movie, order takeout. I can bring you some leftovers the next day. Leftovers. The word landed like a stone in my chest. Like I was a stray cat, grateful for scraps from his table. I set my fork down and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since I'd arrived. Edward, my son, who used to draw me pictures of flowers and beg for extra bedtime stories. Now he sat there, composed and professional, delivering this verdict with the same cool efficiency he probably used to fire an underperforming employee. Edward, I said slowly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Are you saying I'm not welcome at your anniversary party because I'm broke? His face flushed, just a hint of red creeping up his neck. But his voice didn't waver. I'm saying we want what's best for everyone. And right now, what's best is for you to understand that some settings require a certain social ease. And maybe you're not in a place to handle that comfortably. The words cut deeper than I expected, slicing through years of self-doubt I'd carefully tucked away. But something strange happened in that moment. Instead of shrinking, instead of nodding and accepting this latest humiliation with the grace I'd practiced for years, I felt something else, a spark of anger, clean and bright, burning away the fog of shame that had settled over me for so long. I reached for my purse, my movements slow and deliberate. I think I understand, I said, standing from the table. My legs felt steadier than they had in years, as if the ground beneath me had finally stopped shifting. Mom, please, Edward Said, his voice rising just enough to draw a glance from the next table. Don't be dramatic. This isn't personal. It's entirely personal, I replied, my voice calm but firm. And you're right about one thing. I don't belong at your table. His composure cracked then, just for a moment, his eyes widening. Where are you going? We haven't even finished lunch. Don't worry, I said, turning toward the door. I'm sure you can handle the bill with your social ease. I walked out of the Aspen room with my head high, past the hostess's startled expression and the curious stares of other diners. The Denver air was crisp outside, the kind of autumn chill that made you feel alive. It wasn't until I reached my car, 2 blocks away, that I let myself shake, not with fear or shame, but with something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table, a mug of chamomile tea growing cold beside me. The business card from Grayson Wealth Management lay flat on the scratched wooden surface, its edges worn from years of being carried in my purse. I traced the embossed letters with my finger, remembering the day George and I had first met Elizabeth Grayson, the day we'd planned for a future we thought we'd share. After his death, I'd insisted on keeping our finances private, even from Edward and Claire. I wanted them to build their own lives, to know the pride of earning their way without a safety net. But maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd taught Edward to measure worth in dollars instead of heart. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady now, and dialed the number on the card. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Grayson Wealth Management. This is Elizabeth speaking. Hello, Elizabeth, I said, my voice clear and calm. This is Sylvia Turner. I'd like to talk about accessing some of my assets. The offices of Grayson Wealth Management hadn't changed much in the 12 years since I'd last walked through their heavy glass doors. The same polished marble floors, the same soft glow of recessed lighting, the same hush of wealth that used to feel like a warm blanket and now made me feel like an imposter. I smoothed my sweater, the same one I'd worn to lunch with Edward yesterday, and caught my reflection in the lobby's mirrored wall. Sylvia Turner, 67, retired librarian, with a purse that had seen better days and a purpose that felt brand new. Elizabeth Grayson met me in the reception area, her smile professional but tinged with surprise as she took in my appearance. I could almost hear her thoughts, calculating whether I was worth her time. The doubt in her eyes reminded me of Edward's careful glance at my thrift store sweater. And it steadied me, like a challenge I was ready to meet. Mrs. Turner, she said, extending a hand. It's been too long. Please, come in. Her office was just as I remembered, mahogany desk, leather chairs, a view of the Denver skyline that sparkled under the morning sun. Elizabeth looked older now, her auburn hair streaked with silver. But her handshake was firm, her gaze sharp. Sylvia, she said, settling behind her desk. How have you been managing? I haven't heard from you since George. I've been managing, I said, my voice calm but deliberate. Better than most people realize. She raised an eyebrow, catching the edge in my tone, but kept her expression neutral. I'm glad to hear that. You mentioned on the phone you're interested in accessing some of your assets. May I ask what's prompted this? I'd rehearsed this moment in the sleepless hours after walking out of the Aspen room. My mind racing with Edward's words, out of place, uncomfortable, broke, sitting here now. The words felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Someone who'd spent too long apologizing for existing. I'm planning a significant charitable donation, I said, meeting her eyes. $4 million. To the Central American Education Alliance. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the faint tick of a clock on her bookshelf. Elizabeth set down her pen, her professional mask slipping just enough to show genuine shock. $4 million, she repeated, as if testing the words. That's substantial, Sylvia. It would account for nearly 65% of your liquid assets. I'm aware, I said, my voice steady. I've thought this through. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. Have you discussed this with Edward or Claire? Or perhaps another financial advisor? This kind of decision. It's my money, I interrupted, sharper than I'd intended. I softened my tone, but not my resolve. I don't need to discuss it with anyone. For 12 years, I've lived like I had nothing. Elizabeth, canned soup, thrift stores, a car that barely starts. I did it because I wanted my children to learn the value of hard work. To build their own lives without leaning on their father's money. I thought I was teaching them strength. Independence. Elizabeth nodded slowly, her eyes searching my face. And now? Now I see I was wrong. I leaned forward, my hands flat on her desk. The words spilling out like they'd been waiting for years to be said. Yesterday, my son told me I wasn't welcome at his anniversary party. He said I didn't fit in with his successful friends. That I made people uncomfortable just by being there. He's ashamed of me, Elizabeth, ashamed of his broke, out-of-place mother who can't talk about private jets or five-star resorts. Her expression softened, and for a moment, I saw not the polished wealth manager but the woman who'd sat with me after George's death. Helping me navigate a world that felt too big without him. And this donation, she said carefully, is it a response to that conversation? It's a response to 12 years of watching my son turn into someone I don't know. I said, someone who measures people by their bank accounts and dismisses anyone who can't keep up. I thought I was teaching him values. But all I did was teach him to look down on anyone who doesn't live like he does. Those children in Central America, they don't have the luxury of caring about social status. They need books, teachers, medicine. They need someone to believe they're worth helping. Elizabeth opened a leather folder, revealing financial statements I hadn't looked at in years. The numbers were staggering, even to me. George's life insurance, his pension, the investments we'd made during 30 years of marriage, all quietly growing while I clipped coupons and mended my own socks. If you're set on this, she said, we'll need to discuss the tax implications, the timeline for liquidating assets. But Sylvia, what happens after? This will impact your long-term financial security. I'll have enough left, I said, more than enough to live comfortably. But I want this donation to be public. I want my name on it. I want it announced on national news. So everyone who knows Edward Turner understands exactly what his broke mother was capable of. For the first time, Elizabeth smiled, not her professional smile, but something real, almost admiring. George always said you had a fire in you, she said. I see it now. We spent the next hour going over the details, forms, timelines, the logistics of transferring $4 million to the Central American Education Alliance. As we worked, I felt something shift inside me. Like a weight I'd carried for years was finally lifting. I wasn't just Sylvia, the retired librarian who drove a rattling Ford Focus. I was Sylvia Turner, a woman who'd chosen to live small for her children's sake and was now choosing to live big for her own. When I left Grayson Wealth Management, the wheels were in motion. In 2 weeks, the donation would be announced at a press conference, with cameras rolling and my name front and center. I'd be there, speaking about why I'd chosen to invest in children who had nothing rather than adults who thought they had everything. Driving home, I took the long way through Denver's upscale neighborhoods, past the gated communities where Edward and his wife, Lauren, hosted their perfect parties. The houses glowed with warm light, their driveways lined with cars that cost more than my apartment's rent for a decade. I thought about Edward's world, so carefully curated, so quick to exclude anyone who didn't fit. Tomorrow, I'd start the next phase of my plan. Not running away, not disappearing like a wounded child, but stepping away from Edward's life so completely that he'd feel the absence of mine. That night, I sat at my desk. The same one where I'd graded papers and planned library programs years ago. I wrote emails to the few friends I still kept in touch with, explaining I'd be traveling for an extended period. I contacted my utility companies, setting up automatic payments. I called my landlord, arranging to pause my lease. Edward wanted a life free of his embarrassing mother? Fine, I'd give him that, but I'd also show him what he'd lost. I pulled out a worn notebook and started a list: flights to book, supplies to pack. In 4 days, I'd be on a plane to Honduras, where I'd spend 4 months volunteering with the Central American Education Alliance. I'd teach children to read, help at medical clinics, build something real with people who didn't care about the brand of my sweater or the age of my car. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my life around Edward's approval. I was planning it around my own. As I sealed the last email, I thought about the children I'd soon meet, kids who understood the value of a single book, a single meal, a single person who cared. They wouldn't judge me for my lack of social ease. They'd see me for what I could give, and I'd see them for what they were, worth helping. I went to bed that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when you finally choose yourself. The air in Tegucigalpa was thick with heat and the scent of dust and blooming jacaranda trees. After 36 hours of flights and layovers, I stepped off the plane into a world that felt as far from Denver as the moon. The airport was a chaos of voices, vendors calling in Spanish, families embracing with laughter and tears, the hum of life pulsing through every corner. I should have been exhausted, my 67-year-old bones aching from the journey. But instead, I felt awake, alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't Sylvia Turner, the retired librarian who'd made herself small to avoid burdening anyone. I was Sylvia, a woman with a purpose. Maria Alvarez from the Central American Education Alliance met me at customs. Her face weathered but warm, her dark hair pulled into a practical braid. At 55, she carried the kind of energy that comes from a life spent doing work that matters. "Sylvia, welcome to Honduras," she said, her smile wide and genuine. "You're our first major donor who's asked to get her hands dirty in the field." I hefted my single carry-on bag, packed light from years of living simply. "I'm ready to work," I said, and meant it. Maria laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight, and led me through the crowded terminal to a battered Jeep that looked like it had survived decades of Honduran roads. The school where I'd spend my first month was in a rural village an hour outside Tegucigalpa. A cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by dirt paths and tin-roofed houses. Children played in the yards, their laughter mixing with the cluck of chickens and the distant bark of dogs. It was a world Edward would have found shocking, too raw, too unpolished for his carefully curated life. But to me, it felt like a place where I could finally breathe. Dr. Elena Torres, the program director, was a small woman with fierce eyes and a voice that carried authority without raising its volume. She'd been running education and health programs in Central America for 20 years. And within an hour of my arrival, she had me teaching basic reading to a group of children who gathered in a classroom with mismatched desks and a single chalkboard. "You have a gentle way," she said, watching me help a shy girl sound out her first words. "The kids trust you." "I raised 2 of my own," I said, though the words felt strange, like they belonged to a different life. Had I really raised Edward and Claire? Or had I just provided for them while they built walls between us? "These kids are different, though. They're so grateful." Elena nodded, her eyes softening. "They know what it means to have nothing. It makes every gift feel like a miracle." That evening, I settled into my room at the volunteer hostel. A simple space with a cot, a small fan, and a window overlooking the village. My phone buzzed as I unpacked. A message from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then opened it. "Grandma, it's Luna. Mom gave me your number. Are you okay? I miss you." Luna, my 15-year-old granddaughter, whose face I could barely picture because our time together had been so fleeting, awkward holiday dinners where I'd stayed quiet, trying not to embarrass Edward. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. A little boy named Mateo had clung to my hand that afternoon, his eyes bright as he read his first full sentence. I'd felt needed in a way I hadn't in years. I typed a reply, my words careful but warm. "Hi, Luna, I'm okay. I'm in Honduras. Teaching kids to read. How are you? Her response came quickly. That's so cool. Dad's been acting weird since you left. He won't tell me why. But Ethan thinks you guys had a fight. Did you? The directness of her words made me smile. A reminder of how teenagers cut through the careful layers adults build around the truth. I thought about Edward's voice at the Aspen room. His calm explanation of why I didn't belong. I typed back, keeping it simple. We had a disagreement, sweetheart. Sometimes adults need space to figure things out. I'll be back soon. I set the phone down and walked to the hostel's small courtyard, where volunteers gathered to share stories over cups of strong Honduran coffee. A young teacher from Canada, Javier, was talking about his day at a nearby clinic. His face lit with the satisfaction of work that mattered. These kids, he said, they heal faster than any I've seen back home. I think it's because they're so grateful for every little thing. My son takes everything for granted. I found myself saying, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The other volunteers turned to me, their faces curious but kind. He's successful, lives in a big house, has a family anyone would be proud of. But he's learned to measure people by what they own, what they can show off. That's common in places where survival isn't a daily question, said Maria, joining us with a mug of her own. When your basic needs are always met, you start inventing new ways to judge people, money, status, the right kind of conversation. You forget what really matters. I thought living simply would teach him to value character over wealth. I said, my voice quieter now. Instead, he learned to dismiss anyone who doesn't live like him. So you're teaching him a different lesson now, Maria said, her eyes sharp but gentle. What's he losing by pushing you away? I didn't answer right away, letting the question settle. What had Edward lost? A mother who'd supported his dreams without question. A grandmother who could have taken Luna and Ethan on trips that opened their minds, not just their wallets. A family member who'd loved him through every success and failure, no matter how much he tried to distance himself. He lost me, I said finally, and he chose that loss because I didn't fit his idea of worth. The days in Honduras fell into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I'd known in Denver. Mornings teaching reading to children like Sophia, an 8-year-old girl with a smile that could light up the darkest room. She'd been too shy to speak when I first arrived, but by the end of the first week, she was reading simple stories aloud, her voice growing stronger with every word. Afternoons were spent at a nearby clinic, helping distribute vitamins and comfort nervous kids before checkups. Evenings, I wrote in a journal I'd started keeping, not just about the work, but about the woman I was becoming. On my 10th day, I was helping Sophia with a new book when my phone buzzed again. Another message from Luna. Grandma, Dad saw something on the news about you. He's freaking out. What's going on? I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The press conference. It was scheduled for tomorrow, when the Central American Education Alliance would announce my $4 million donation on national television. I'd asked for my name to be attached, for the world, and Edward, to know what I'd done. I hadn't expected the news to leak early. I typed a quick reply to Luna. Everything's fine, sweetheart, just focus on school. I'll explain when I'm back. The next morning, a news crew from CNN arrived at the school. Their cameras and microphones a stark contrast to the dusty chalkboards and giggling children. Maria introduced me to the reporter, a young woman with a kind smile and sharp questions. Mrs. Turner, she asked, as we sat in the school's small office, surrounded by books my donation had bought. What inspired you to give $4 million to children in Central America? I looked out the window at Sophia, who was reading to a group of younger kids, her face glowing with pride. These children know the value of a single chance, I said. They're grateful for a book, a meal, a teacher who shows up. They don't care about your status or your bank account. They just know you chose to help when they needed it most. And that matters more to me than anything. As the cameras rolled, I thought about Edward watching from his sleek Denver office, his world of glass and steel so far from this village. I wasn't thinking about his approval anymore. I was thinking about Sophia, about Mateo, about the dozens of children whose lives were changing because someone believed in them. For the first time in 12 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The Honduran sun was setting, painting the village in shades of gold and orange. as I sat on the hostel's rooftop terrace with my journal open in my lap. The air smelled of dust and cooking fires, and the laughter of children playing soccer in the street below drifted up like a song. I'd spent the day teaching Sophia and her classmates, watching their eyes light up as they pieced together new words. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not invisible, not out of place, needed. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. The screen lit up with Edward's name, and my heart stuttered, the familiar tightness creeping into my chest. His calls had always carried the potential for disappointment, a reminder of the distance between us. I let it ring 3 times. 4. Before picking up, my voice steady but guarded. "Hello, Edward, Mom." His voice was strained, almost breathless, nothing like the polished confidence I was used to. I just saw the news. The morning show on CNN. They said Sylvia Turner donated $4 million to some education fund in Central America. Please tell me that wasn't you." The words hung between us, heavy with everything he couldn't bring himself to say. Please tell me my broke, embarrassing mother isn't the woman who just made national headlines. Please tell me I haven't made a terrible mistake. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the village lights twinkling in the dusk. "Yes," I said simply. "That was me." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Edward spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. $4 million. Mom? Where? How did you? You've had this money the whole time? Yes, I said, my tone even. The whole time. He let out a sound. Half exhale, half groan. The whole time I've been worrying about you. Thinking you were scraping by in that tiny apartment. Driving that ancient car. Shopping at discount stores. You let me think you were struggling. Why? I stood and walked to the edge of the terrace, gripping the phone a little tighter. The street below was alive with movement, kids kicking a makeshift soccer ball. Mothers calling them in for dinner. I thought about the years I'd spent in Denver, living quietly, carefully, while Edward built his world of glass and steel. I wanted you and Claire to make your own way. I said, I wanted you to know the pride of building something for yourself, without leaning on your father's money. I thought if you knew about the assets, the insurance, the investments, you'd never learn what it means to stand on your own. So you pretended to be broke? His voice was rising now, a mix of shock and something sharper, like anger. You let us think you couldn't afford to join us for dinners, for trips, for anything. Do you know how many nights Lauren and I stayed up, talking about whether we should offer to help you? How many times I worried about what would happen if you got sick or had an emergency? The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd worried about my imaginary poverty while telling me I didn't belong at his anniversary party because I couldn't keep up with his wealthy friends. He'd lost sleep over my supposed struggles while dismissing me as too out of place for his polished world. I'm sorry you worried, I said, and I meant it. That wasn't my intention. Then what was your intention? He snapped, his voice cracking. Because right now, it feels like you've been lying to me for 12 years. I closed my eyes, picturing Edward in his sleek office, surrounded by awards and framed photos of his perfect family. My intention was to raise children who valued people for who they are, not what they have. Children who wouldn't judge someone's worth by their bank account or their ability to talk about luxury vacations. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. I could hear his sharp intake of breath, could almost see him processing the weight of what I'd said. That's not fair, he said, but his voice was softer now, defensive. I don't judge people by their money. Don't you? I asked, my tone gentle but firm. 2 weeks ago, at the Aspen Room, you told me I wasn't welcome at your anniversary party because I didn't fit in with your successful friends. You said I made people uncomfortable. Edward, you were ashamed of your broke mother who couldn't contribute to conversations about private jets and 5-star resorts. What am I supposed to think about that? Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke, his voice was small, almost childlike. I wasn't ashamed of you being broke. I was worried you'd feel left out, that you'd be uncomfortable around Lauren's parents, their friends. Were you? I asked. Or were you worried I'd embarrass you? I let the question hang, giving him room to face it. Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you only cared about how I'd look to the people in your world. And now that you know I could have afforded those vacations, Those dinners, all along, how does that change things? I don't know, he said, his voice breaking. I don't know what to think anymore. I looked out at the village, where Sophia's mother was sweeping the doorstep of their small home, her silhouette lit by a single bulb. These families understood what it meant to have nothing. And yet they gave everything: smiles, gratitude, hope. Edward, I said, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry that you've built a successful life. I'm proud of you, but I'm disappointed that you've learned to measure people's worth by their ability to keep up with your lifestyle. That's not what I was doing, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Like he was hearing himself for the first time. Is it? Because, God, Mom, when you put it like that, I can't defend it. I didn't respond right away, letting his admission settle. For years, I'd made excuses for him. Told myself his distance was just the natural drift of adult children. But that lunch at the Aspen Room had stripped away the illusions. He'd chosen to exclude me, not because I couldn't afford his world, but because he thought I didn't belong in it. Mom, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading, can we talk about this in person? Can you come home? Lauren and we want to make this right. I can't, I said, my voice steady. I'm staying in Honduras for a while, then heading to Costa Rica. I'll be volunteering with the Education Alliance for the next 4 months. 4 months? He sounded stunned, like the idea was unthinkable. Mom, you can't just disappear like that. What about Luna's birthday? What about Christmas? The questions told me everything I needed to know. Not concern for my safety or curiosity about the children I was helping. Just worry about how my absence would disrupt his carefully planned events. I thought you'd already decided I didn't belong at those celebrations. I said, you wanted a life free of your embarrassing mother. I'm giving you that. That's not fair, he said, and I could hear the edge of tears in his voice. That was before I knew. Things are different now, are they? I asked. Or are you just worried about how it looks to exclude someone who made headlines for giving away $4 million? The words were sharper than I'd meant. But they were true. I could picture him, standing in his pristine kitchen, trying to reconcile the mother he'd dismissed with the woman who'd just changed lives halfway across the world. Mom, please, he said, his voice breaking completely now. Don't leave like this. Let me fix this. I'll apologize. I'll explain to Lauren's parents. To everyone. I was wrong. How? I asked, my voice harder than I'd intended. How do you fix telling your mother she's not good enough for your family? What do you tell Luna and Ethan about why their grandmother wasn't invited to your party? He didn't answer, and the silence was answer enough. I'll be back in March, I said finally. When I return, we can talk about what kind of relationship we want to have. But Edward, I'm not the same woman who sat across from you at that restaurant. I'm not going to make myself smaller to fit your world anymore. I hung up before he could respond, my hands steady as I set the phone down. Below, the village was quiet now. The children gone inside, the night settling over the houses like a blanket. Tomorrow, I'd be back in the classroom with Sophia, helping her read a new story. In a week, I'd move to a clinic in Costa Rica, distributing supplies my donation had funded. For the first time in years, I was going where I was wanted, not tolerated, not judged, but truly wanted, and that was enough. The San Jose airport was a blur of color and sound, the humid air clinging to my skin as I waited for my flight back to Denver. 4 months had passed since I'd left, and the woman staring back at me from the terminal's glass reflection was different. My hands were rougher from helping build classroom shelves in Honduras. My hair was shorter, cropped by a village barber in Costa Rica for practicality. My eyes, though, they held a clarity I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't the same Sylvia Turner who'd walked out of the Aspen Room, head high but heart heavy. I was someone new, someone who'd found purpose in places where gratitude was currency and love didn't come with conditions. In my carry-on bag was a folder stuffed with photographs and letters. Sophia, the 8-year-old girl from Honduras, beaming as she held her first book, her mother's arm around her shoulders. The teenagers in Costa Rica, shyly practicing English phrases I'd taught them, their faces lit with hope for futures they could now imagine. A handwritten note from a dozen children at a new school my donation had helped build. Each line in careful pencil. Thank you for giving us a chance. Those words had become my anchor, reminding me that worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or social ease, but by the lives you touched. My phone had buzzed throughout the journey home, missed calls from Edward, texts from Luna, even a voicemail from Claire, my daughter in Boulder, who rarely got involved in family drama. Luna's messages were the ones I read. Her words simple and unguarded. "Grandma, Dad's been so quiet lately. He keeps watching your CNN interview. Are you coming back for my birthday? I really want you there." Her concern was pure, untainted by the calculations that colored Edward's world. She just wanted her grandmother back. As the plane descended into Denver, I made a decision. I'd see Luna and Ethan, my grandchildren, but Edward? He'd have to earn his way back into my life, if he wanted to be there at all. My apartment felt like a time capsule when I unlocked the door. The same worn couch, the same small kitchen where I'd heated countless cans of soup, the same single bedroom with a stack of library books on the nightstand. It was home, but it didn't feel like mine anymore, not because it had changed, but because I'd been back for less than an hour when a knock came at the door. Edward stood there, looking like a shadow of the man I'd seen at the Aspen Room. His suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a plain sweater. His face was drawn, dark circles under his eyes, his usually perfect hair messy, like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking on the single word. "You're back." "I'm back," I said, my tone neutral. I didn't step aside, didn't invite him in. We stood in the doorway, two strangers trying to find a way back to something we'd lost. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "The CNN story, the articles, the interviews, I've watched them all. The schools you're building, the kids you're helping. Mom, I'm proud of you. Are you?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. "Or are you proud that your mother isn't the embarrassment you thought she was?" He flinched, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I never thought you were an embarrassment," he said, but the words sounded hollow, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "You told me I didn't belong at your anniversary party," I said, my voice low but firm. "You said I made your in-laws uncomfortable, that I lacked the social ease to fit in with your world. What would you call that?" "Edward?" He took a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging. "I'd call it the worst mistake I've ever made." The words came out in a rush, raw and unguarded. "I've replayed that lunch 1,000 times. Mom, I've lost sleep. I've hated myself for it. I turned into someone I don't even recognize. Someone who could say those things to his own mother." I studied his face, searching for the careful calculation I'd come to expect from him, the polished professional who always knew the right thing to say. But what I saw was different. Vulnerability, regret, the kind of raw honesty I hadn't seen from him since he was a boy. Crying in my arms after a bad day at school. "What do you want from me, Edward?" I asked, my voice softer now, but still guarded. "I want to understand how I became that person," he said, his voice breaking. "I want to know how to fix the damage I've done. I want my mom back." I crossed my arms, the weight of his words settling over me. "Which mom do you want back? The broke one who made you feel guilty for your success? Or the wealthy one who could have funded your kids' college or your next big vacation?" He winced, tears welling in his eyes. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I saw the news, my first thought was relief. Relief that I didn't have to worry about your finances anymore, that you could afford to be part of our world. But then I watched your interviews, saw you with those kids in Honduras, talking about how they're grateful for every chance they get. And I realized, those kids got the mother I pushed away. They got your heart, your time, your kindness, because I decided you weren't good enough for my table." The admission hung between us, brutal and honest. For the first time, I saw my son taking responsibility, not deflecting or excusing. "Luna's been asking about you every day," he continued, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Ethan keeps wondering why you're not coming to dinner. They don't understand why their grandmother disappeared. And I can't tell them the truth because it makes me sound like a monster." "And what's the truth, Edward?" I asked, my voice gentle now, almost a whisper. "The truth is I forgot what matters," he said. "I got so caught up in success, money, status, the right kind of friends, that I lost sight of the person who taught me to be better." You raised me to work hard. To be kind. But I inherited Dad's drive and none of his heart. I want to be the kind of person those kids in Honduras think you are. Someone who gives without expecting anything back. Someone who sees people for who they are, not what they have. I looked at him, really looked at him, standing in my doorway, stripped of the confidence he'd worn like armor. He was still Edward, successful, polished, living a life of privilege, but something had shifted. The cold distance I'd felt at the Aspen room was gone, replaced by a fragility I hadn't seen in years. Sylvia, he said, using my name instead of Mom for the first time. Would you come to Luna's birthday? Not because you can afford to, but because we need you there. Because Luna and Ethan need their grandmother. And I need to remember what it feels like to have a mother who's proud of me for the right reasons. I stepped aside, opening the door wider. Come in, I said. I want to tell you about a girl named Sophia, who taught me that gratitude and love are the only things that truly matter. He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the worn furniture. The modest life I'd built. Not with judgment now, but with something closer to understanding. We sat on my old couch. And I told him about Sophia. About the teenagers in Costa Rica. About the letters from children who'd written thank you for giving us a chance. I showed him photos, read him their words, described the joy of being needed, not just tolerated. And as I talked, I watched his face change, not back to the boy he'd been, but into someone new, someone who was starting to see the difference between having worth and recognizing it in others. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a possibility, and for the first time in 12 years, that felt like enough. Looking back, I realized the greatest gift I gave myself wasn't the $4 million I donated, or even the months I spent with those children in Central America. It was the courage to stop apologizing for who I was. I'd spent years making myself small, thinking it would teach my children strength. But all it did was teach them to measure worth by the wrong things. Love, gratitude, kindness, those are the currencies that matter. They're what bind us to each other, what make a life worth living. And if we're lucky, we get the chance to rebuild what we've broken. Not with money, but with the simple act of seeing each other clearly.